I've been a surgeon for 17 years and I thought I'd seen everything. Every type of injury, every kind of loss, every shade of human suffering. But nothing prepared me for the moment when Daniel Foster walked into my office last September and looked at me like I was the reason his entire world had collapsed. I didn't recognize him at first. He was just another name on my schedule, another routine follow-up consultation after a minor procedure I'd performed on his shoulder. But when he sat down across from my desk, there was something in his eyes that made my stomach turn. It wasn't anger exactly. It was deeper than that. It was the kind of look that said, "You destroyed something irreplaceable, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for it." I tried to be professional. I asked him how he was recovering, if the pain had subsided, if he was regaining full mobility. He answered in short, clipped sentences, never breaking eye contact. Every response felt like an accusation I couldn't understand. I kept searching my memory, trying to figure out if I'd made a mistake during his surgery, if something had gone wrong that I hadn't noticed. But the procedure had been textbook perfect. There were no complications, no errors, nothing that could explain why this man was sitting in front of me radiating pure resentment. Then, about 10 minutes into the appointment, he interrupted me mid-sentence. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, and his voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "Do you remember a night in February, 12 years ago? Do you remember a car accident victim you treated in the ER at County General?" I felt something shift in my chest. County General. I'd done my residency there back when I was young and ambitious and worked 30-hour shifts without blinking. February, 12 years ago. I tried to pull up the memory, but those years were a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline and too many patients to count. He could see I was struggling to remember. He leaned forward slightly, and his hands were completely still on his lap, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. "Her name was Olivia Foster," he said. "She was 28 years old. She was my wife. And you were the doctor on duty the night she was brought in after a drunk driver hit her car head-on Route 40. The words landed like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples through every part of me. Olivia Foster. The name echoed in my head, pulling up fragments of memory I'd buried under years of other emergencies, other faces, other impossible decisions. I remembered her then, not clearly, not in perfect detail, but enough. A young woman, massive internal bleeding, multiple fractures, barely conscious when the paramedics wheeled her in. It was 2 a.m. and the ER was chaos that night. There'd been a pileup on the interstate and we had more critical patients than we had hands to treat them. I remembered triaging, making rapid assessments, trying to determine who we could save and who we had to prioritize. That's what they train you to do in emergency medicine. You can't save everyone, so you save the ones with the best chance of survival. Olivia Foster had arrived with a tension pneumothorax and severe abdominal trauma. I remembered starting to work on her, getting lines in, ordering scans, preparing for emergency surgery. But then another patient came in, a teenage boy who'd been trapped under a vehicle. He was coding, no pulse, but still potentially viable if we acted immediately. I had to make a choice in seconds. I left Olivia with a second-year resident and took the boy to surgery myself. That kid lived. I saved his life that night. I went home the next morning feeling like I'd accomplished something meaningful. I never knew that Olivia Foster died on the table while I was working on someone else. No one told me. In the chaos of that shift, with patients cycling through so fast I could barely keep track, her death became just another statistic in the monthly mortality report. Just another name I never learned, another face I forgot by the time I collapsed into bed at dawn. That's how it works in emergency medicine. You can't hold on to every loss or you'd never survive the job. You compartmentalize. You move forward. You tell yourself you did everything you could. But sitting across from Daniel Foster, watching him look at me with 12 years of grief etched into every line of his face, I realized that what feels like survival to a doctor feels like abandonment to the family waiting in the lobby. He'd been there that night. He'd been pacing the hallways, begging nurses for updates, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. He'd watched them bring other patients in after his wife, and he'd watched those patients get immediate attention while Olivia lay there, bleeding internally, with only an exhausted resident trying desperately to keep her stable. "You chose," Daniel said, and his voice cracked just slightly. "You looked at my wife, and you looked at that other patient, and you decided she wasn't worth saving." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain trauma protocols and triage decisions and the impossible mathematics of emergency medicine. But the words felt hollow before I even spoke them. Because he was right, in a way. I had chosen. I'd made a decision based on training and experience and statistical probability of survival. And his wife had died because of it. The silence in my office stretched out until it felt suffocating. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." Felt grotesquely inadequate. It was my job, wasn't an excuse. She wouldn't have survived anyway was something I couldn't possibly know for certain. And even if it were true, it wouldn't matter to the man sitting across from me. Daniel wasn't here for medical explanations. He was here because for 12 years he'd been carrying a weight that had no name, and then 3 months ago, he'd seen my face on a hospital billboard advertising our orthopedic department. He'd recognized me instantly, and suddenly all that nameless grief had found a target. I asked him why he'd come to me for his shoulder surgery, why he'd chosen to put himself in my hands again after what happened. He gave me a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I needed to see you," he said. "I needed to look at you as a person, not as the monster I'd built up in my head all these years. I needed to understand if you were just evil, or if you were human and flawed and trying your best in an impossible situation. I needed to know if I could hate you or if I had to forgive you, and I honestly don't know which one would be easier." We talked for over an hour after that. I told him everything I remembered about that night, every detail I could pull from the fragmented memories and the medical records I'd pulled up after our first appointment, when something about his hostility had bothered me enough to investigate. I told him about the teenage boy I'd saved, about the decision-making process in trauma situations, about the guilt I'd carried for years over patients I couldn't help. But I also told him the truth that mattered most. I was sorry, genuinely, devastatingly sorry. Not because I'd done something medically wrong, but because my doing everything right had still resulted in his wife dying while I was in another operating room. Daniel told me about Olivia, about how they'd met in college, how she'd been studying to be a teacher, how she'd had this laugh that made everyone around her start laughing too. He told me about the future they'd planned, the children they'd wanted, the small house they'd just bought in a neighborhood with good schools. He told me about the 12 years since her death, the depression, the anger, the failed relationships, the therapy that helped but never quite healed. He told me about the son he never had, the birthdays he celebrated alone, the wedding anniversary he still acknowledged every year with flowers on her grave. I listened to every word, and I felt the weight of it settle into my bones. This was the part of medicine they don't teach you in medical school. They teach you anatomy and pharmacology and surgical technique. They teach you how to make difficult decisions under pressure. But they don't teach you how to carry the human cost of those decisions. They don't teach you how to look someone in the eye and accept that you did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. When Daniel finally left my office that day, we shook hands. It felt strange and formal and completely insufficient for what had just passed between us. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a moment of shared humanity in the middle of all that pain. He told me he didn't hate me. He said he'd wanted to, had tried to, but sitting across from me and seeing me as a real person had made it impossible. He said he still didn't know if he could forgive me, but he was going to try, for his own sake, not for mine. I haven't stopped thinking about that conversation in the 2 months since it happened. It's changed something fundamental in how I practice medicine. I'm still a surgeon. I still make life and death decisions regularly. I still have to triage and prioritize and sometimes choose between patients who all desperately need help. But now, every time I make those decisions, I think about Daniel Foster sitting in a waiting room 12 years ago, watching his entire future disappear while I was trying to save someone else's. I've started doing something I never did before. When I lose a patient now, I make a point to learn their name, to read about their life in the chart notes, to acknowledge, at least privately, that they were a person with a history and relationships and dreams that will never be fulfilled. It doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't bring anyone back. But it feels like the least I can do, the bare minimum of respect for the weight of what we do in this profession. Last week I saw Daniel in the hospital cafeteria. He was there visiting his sister, who was having a baby in the maternity ward. We made eye contact across the room, and for a moment I considered looking away, pretending I hadn't seen him. But instead, I walked over. We didn't talk about Olivia or that night or anything heavy. We just talked about his sister, about the excitement of becoming an uncle, about the strange hopefulness of hospitals where people are dying and being born in the same building. It was a normal conversation, almost comfortable. As I was leaving, he called after me. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, and I turned back. "Thank you," he said simply, "for listening, for being honest, for being human about it." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked away. I thought about his words all day. Thank you for being human about it, as if that were something remarkable, something unexpected, and maybe in medicine it is. We're trained to be objective, clinical, detached. We're taught that emotional distance is professional, that getting too involved is dangerous. But standing in that cafeteria, I realized that sometimes the most healing thing we can offer isn't our technical skill or our medical knowledge. Sometimes it's just our willingness to acknowledge that we're all fragile and flawed and doing our best in situations that have no perfect answers. I'll never forget Olivia Foster now. Her name is written in my mind alongside every other decision I've made, every other life I've touched. And I think that's how it should be. The weight of this profession isn't just in the successes we celebrate. It's in the losses we carry, the choices we live with, the people who never got to go home. Daniel taught me that. And I'm grateful for it, even though it hurts.